a torrential storm swallowing the faint echoes of a desperate cry. Her knees buckled beneath her, the weight of both her bruised body and unborn child too much to bear. The woman, cold and bleeding, gripped the road with trembling hands, her breath shallow, gasping for air as her eyes glazed over. The fight had been brutal. The words he had spoken echoed in her ears, his anger suffocating. "You'll never leave me," he had shouted as he forced her to the ground. Her heart beat wildly in the throes of panic, but no matter how loudly she screamed, the world seemed deaf to her suffering. Her body refused to move, surrendering to the cold, to the pain that had left her broken in more ways than one. The world faded into darkness as she fought to stay awake, the only sound the roar of the storm. In the midst of her misery, she couldn't help but think of the life she carried within her. Before we continue, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Suddenly, through the haze of fog and rain, a figure appeared, a soldier. His uniform was soaked through, the dark fabric clinging to his frame as if to remind him of the weight of his duty. Ethan Cole, a man worn by years of sacrifice and loss, felt a stirring within him that he couldn't ignore. His canine, Rex, a massive German shepherd, barked ahead, pulling on his leash. The soldier and his dog moved like one, an inseparable pair. Ethan's boots splashed through puddles, his focus honed to the woman on the ground. The silence between them held more power than any word could convey. She was in trouble, but she wasn't alone. Ethan knelt beside her, his gloved hands gentle as they cradled her face, brushing the wet strands of hair from her forehead. Rex, ever loyal, stood protectively beside them, his keen eyes scanning the surroundings. The soldier's heart clenched, her eyes fluttered open for a moment, but the words escaped her, words that were lost to the wind. Ethan's voice, low and comforting, broke the tension. "You're going to be okay. I'm here." His words didn't promise an easy road ahead, but they offered something far more crucial: hope. As the woman fought to stay conscious, Rex's ears twitched, and a sudden movement caught his attention, a faint rustling. The soldier's grip tightened around the woman, pulling her close. He didn't need to look. He could feel the danger creeping in. The world stood still for a heartbeat, then a whisper from the child's doll on the side of the road broke the silence. A small plastic figure, half buried in mud, seemed to call for help as it tumbled from its owner's grasp. The sound of her last cry. A flash of light pierced through the rain as a distant car's headlights grew brighter, its presence unmistakable. And just like that, Ethan and Rex had no choice but to move. The faint growl of Rex's warning echoed through the storm as the headlights of the approaching car sliced through the rain. Ethan's heart raced, every instinct telling him to shield the woman from whatever was coming next. He positioned himself between her and the road, his eyes narrowing at the dark silhouette moving swiftly towards them. The car screeched to a halt just feet away, splashing water in every direction. The door flung open, and a man in a dark coat stepped out, his eyes flickering to Ethan and then to the woman. His voice was sharp, laden with urgency. "Is she—" "Stay back!" Ethan's voice cracked with command, a growl of frustration rising in his chest. He was already bracing himself for whatever move this stranger would make. But the man raised his hands in surrender. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," the stranger said quickly, his eyes scanning the scene with suspicion. He took a cautious step forward, then paused. "I saw her collapse. I can help, but I need to know if she's breathing." Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the stranger, but his focus was primarily on the woman. Slowly, he lowered her head onto his knee, one hand still resting against her cheek. His fingers moved to her throat, searching for the faint pulse he desperately hoped to find. It was weak, but it was there. A small breath escaped her lips. "She's alive," Ethan said, though his voice was far from calm. The man hesitated before kneeling beside Ethan, his hands moving to help lift the woman. You've got to get her out of here. There's no time for hesitation." "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, his mind already racing. He wasn't sure whether to trust the man, but with the woman's safety hanging by a thread, he had little choice. The stranger looked around nervously, then glanced back at the car. "I've got a cabin up ahead. It's the closest place I can get her some help. No one will come looking there, not in this storm." Ethan considered for a moment. There was no time to argue. He had to trust the man, even if only for now. The storm was getting worse, and they would need shelter. As the stranger carefully lifted the woman, Ethan reached for Rex's leash, pulling the dog closer. Rex let out a low growl, sensing the unease in his partner. Ethan gave him a reassuring pat. "Stay close, boy," Ethan muttered, his eyes scanning the darkened road for any other threats. The man led them down a narrow path that wound through the woods, the sound of the storm masking any footsteps or movements behind them. The ground was slick with rain, and the trees groaned as the wind pushed through them, but Ethan's determination was unwavering. He wasn't going to let this woman suffer any longer. She needed help, and he would get it, no matter the cost. They arrived at the cabin a few minutes later, and the stranger opened the door with a forceful shove. The musty air inside hit them like a wave, but it was warmer, and that was enough. Ethan helped the man move the woman inside, laying her carefully on a worn-out couch near the fire. He could see the blood staining her clothes, the bruises on her face, but there was still life in her, just barely. The stranger hurried to a table by the wall, grabbing a medical kit and a small bottle of water. "I'll clean the wounds, but we'll need to keep her warm. The baby—" His voice trailed off. "Don't talk about the baby," Ethan snapped, the thought of losing her child a pain too sharp to bear. He turned to the dog, who had followed them inside, and whispered, "Stay." Rex curled up in a corner, his eyes never leaving his partner, as if he knew the weight of what was at stake. "Do you have any medical experience?" Ethan asked, trying to steady his voice. The urgency in his chest pressed on him, each breath growing harder as he watched the stranger work on the woman's wounds. The man looked up briefly, his hands trembling. "I'm not a doctor, but I've patched up enough wounds in my time." He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, his eyes darting back to the woman. "She needs a real hospital, but if we wait for the storm to pass, we may not have the time." Ethan clenched his fists, frustration building in his chest. "I'll carry her if I have to, get her stabilized, and we'll get her out of here." "Ethan," the stranger started, his voice hesitant. I think we might be the ones in danger here." Ethan's brows furrowed, his instincts on high alert. "What are you talking about?" The man paused, then leaned in close. This wasn't just some random attack. She was trying to escape from someone, from her husband. He'll be looking for her. Ethan's stomach churned as he turned to the woman, the gravity of her situation sinking in. This wasn't just about helping a woman in need. It was about saving her from a man willing to do anything to control her. Just then, the wind outside howled again, the sound of approaching footsteps reaching their ears. A whisper. Then the door creaked, and Ethan's heart stopped. Someone was outside. The danger they had feared was closer than they thought. The footsteps grew louder, crunching against the wet ground, drawing closer with every passing second. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing. His instincts screamed at him to act, but there was nowhere to hide. The cabin was small, the walls thin, and the storm outside offered little cover from the danger that was now creeping toward them. The stranger's face paled as he stepped back toward the window, peering cautiously through a crack in the wooden frame. "It's him," he whispered, almost as if afraid to speak too loudly. "Her husband, he's here. I saw his truck." Ethan's heart raced. The woman, barely conscious, lay motionless on the couch. She was unaware of the impending danger, her breathing shallow but steady. But the storm was nothing compared to what was coming for them. "Do you have a weapon?" Ethan's voice was low but urgent. He wasn't a fan of violence, but in this situation there was no other choice. His canine, Rex, stood alert beside him, his ears twitching at the distant sound of footsteps. The stranger shook his head. "I didn't think it would come to this. I was just trying to help." Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't waste time. The woman's safety, and their own, depended on how quickly they could act. "We don't have much time. We need to move her, now." The stranger nodded, his eyes darting around the room. "There's a back exit, through the woods. We can get out before he reaches the door." Ethan didn't hesitate. He knelt beside the woman, his hand gently shaking her shoulder. "Hey, wake up. You need to listen to me. We're leaving. It's not safe here." Her eyes fluttered open, weak and blurry. For a moment, she looked lost, unsure of where she was, before recognition dawned in her gaze. "Ethan." Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile and full of fear. He nodded, his voice calm but firm. "We're going to get you out of here. I need you to hold on for me, okay?" She nodded faintly, tears brimming in her eyes, but she said nothing more. It was clear she didn't have the strength to argue. The stranger grabbed the medical kit and slung it over his shoulder. "I'll cover the rear. You get her out of here." Ethan turned to Rex, giving him a sharp command. "Stay close. No matter what happens, don't let anyone get to her." The dog's ears perked, his teeth visible in a low growl as he stood at attention. Without another word, Ethan lifted the woman into his arms, cradling her as gently as he could while keeping his pace quick. They moved swiftly toward the back exit, the wind howling louder as they stepped into the rain-soaked night. The stranger followed closely behind, glancing nervously over his shoulder every few steps. The rain had turned the ground into a muddy mess, but there was no turning back. They had to make it to safety. As they moved through the trees, the storm intensified, the thunder cracking through the air like the sound of distant gunfire. The night seemed to close in around them, darkness and rain mixing into an overwhelming void. But the footsteps, those unmistakable, heavy steps, were still behind them. The woman's husband was getting closer. "Faster," Ethan urged, his voice tight with tension. He could feel the weight of the woman in his arms, but he pushed forward, determined to get her to safety. Suddenly a shout broke through the noise of the storm. "Where are you?" The voice was unmistakable, gruff, angry, filled with venom. It was him, the woman's husband. Ethan's pulse quickened, his steps becoming more urgent. They had to make it to the cabin on the other side of the woods. If they could just reach that small shelter, they might stand a chance. But as the sounds of pursuit grew louder, Ethan realized something terrifying. They weren't going to make it in time. The husband was closing in faster than he expected. A flash of movement in the corner of his eye. Rex darted ahead, his fur wet and matted against his body, but his eyes were locked on the path ahead. Then, without warning, the canine launched himself into the darkness, growling fiercely. "Rex, no!" Ethan shouted, but it was too late. The dog's figure vanished into the night, and Ethan felt the woman stir in his arms, her weak voice breaking the silence. "Ethan, what's happening?" He could feel her trembling, and he quickly reassured her, "We're almost there. Stay with me, okay?" But the situation had just escalated. The last thing Ethan wanted was for Rex to be caught in this madness. He needed to get the woman to safety, but a part of him couldn't help but worry about his loyal companion. The sound of Rex's growl echoed through the trees, followed by a brief scuffle, then a sharp, high-pitched yelp. Ethan froze. The danger had just become very real. The air was thick with tension, as if the storm itself could sense the impending danger. Ethan froze, his heart hammering in his chest. Rex's bark, fierce and protective, cut through the rain, followed by a yelp that sent a cold chill down Ethan's spine. His blood ran cold as the realization hit him. Rex was in trouble. "Stay with her," Ethan ordered the stranger as he gently placed the woman against a nearby tree. He didn't wait for a response before sprinting into the rain-soaked woods, his boots sinking into the mud with every step. The storm raged, the winds whipping at his face, the sound of his heart beating in his ears. He pushed through the underbrush, branches scratching at his skin, but his focus was sharp. He had to get to Rex. As he moved, the sounds of the struggle grew louder, the growls, the sounds of struggle, and then silence. Ethan's breath hitched, panic creeping in. He couldn't lose Rex, not after everything they'd been through. Suddenly he burst into a small clearing. The sight before him made his stomach drop. Rex was on the ground, his body pressed against the wet earth. The woman's husband stood over him, a menacing grin on his face. The man was holding something in his hand, a metal pipe, blood dripping from its edge. "Get away from him!" Ethan shouted, his voice full of rage as he stepped forward. The man turned, his grin fading as he saw Ethan approach, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can stop me? She's mine, and so is this dog." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, his breath coming in sharp, angry gasps. "You'll have to go through me first," the man scoffed, twirling the pipe in his hand. "I've been through worse than you, soldier. You're no match for me." But Ethan wasn't thinking about fighting him. He wasn't thinking about anything other than getting Rex out of harm's way. Without another word, Ethan lunged forward, aiming for the man's arm, but the man swung the pipe downward. Ethan's instincts kicked in and he ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow. The pipe thudded into the muddy ground, and Ethan seized the opportunity. With a swift movement, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it and sending the weapon flying from his hand. But the man wasn't done yet. With a growl, he charged forward, tackling Ethan to the ground. They rolled through the mud, fists swinging, the storm blurring the lines between them. "Stay down!" the man shouted, but Ethan didn't relent. The fight had escalated, and there was only one thing Ethan cared about: protecting Rex and the woman. The struggle continued for a few moments, but then something unexpected happened. A sharp, low growl broke through the chaos. Rex, despite the pain, launched himself at the man, sinking his teeth into the intruder's leg. The man screamed, his grip loosening on Ethan. In a desperate move, Ethan used the opening to throw the man off him, scrambling to his feet. Rex, still snarling, stood protectively beside him. "You crazy animal!" the man roared, clutching his leg. "You'll regret this!" But Ethan wasn't listening. He pulled Rex back by the collar, making sure the dog was safe, before turning to the woman's husband. "You need to leave, now!" His voice was icy, his anger barely contained. The man growled but backed off, glaring at them with fury. "This isn't over, soldier. I'll find you." With that, he turned and ran back into the woods, disappearing into the night. Ethan stood there for a moment, his chest heaving with heavy breaths, his hands still clenched into fists. He turned toward Rex, who was limping but otherwise unharmed. The dog's fur was matted, but he was still the same loyal companion Ethan had come to trust with his life. "You did good, boy," Ethan murmured, giving Rex a quick pat on the head. The dog let out a soft whine in response, his eyes still alert. With the immediate danger gone, Ethan turned back to the woman, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. He knew they weren't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. When he reached her, the stranger was still there, keeping watch. The woman's face was pale, but her breathing had steadied, and her eyes seemed to clear a little as she saw Ethan return. "Is he gone?" she whispered, her voice fragile but hopeful. Ethan nodded. "For now, but we need to move. We can't stay here." The stranger stepped forward. "I'll help you. I know a place farther down the road. It's safer there." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Let's go." With Rex limping beside him, Ethan carefully helped the woman to her feet. The rain continued to pour, but they had no choice now. They couldn't wait. The storm was their only cover. They moved as fast as they could, with the stranger leading the way through the trees. Every so often, Ethan would glance over his shoulder, making sure no one was following them. The night felt alive with threats, but they pushed forward, step by step. As they walked, the woman spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for saving me." Ethan's gaze softened. "You don't need to thank me. Just stay with us. and we'll get you somewhere safe." But even as he spoke, the weight of the situation pressed on him. Her husband would be back, and next time they might not be so lucky. The rain began to ease as they trudged through the thick woods, but the oppressive feeling of danger still hung in the air, like a thick fog that wouldn't lift. Ethan's mind raced, his thoughts never far from the threat they had just escaped. He glanced at the woman who clung to him for support, her pale face showing signs of exhaustion, but also a quiet determination. She had survived the worst of it, but they weren't safe yet. As they walked, the stranger led them down a narrow trail, barely visible through the underbrush. The storm had made the forest more treacherous, the mud slick and unforgiving beneath their feet. Rex limped ahead, his body weary but his senses still sharp. Ethan felt a pang of guilt as he watched the dog struggle to keep up, but there was no time to dwell on it. "We're almost there," the stranger said, his voice low, but filled with urgency. Ethan didn't respond. He was focused, his every sense alert. He couldn't afford to relax, not yet. Every rustle of the trees, every distant sound sent his heart into overdrive. His mind kept replaying the confrontation with the woman's husband, the pipe, the desperation in the man's eyes. He wasn't going to stop, not until he had her back. The cabin the stranger had mentioned was just ahead, nestled in a clearing surrounded by trees. It looked small and weathered, but to Ethan it was a beacon of hope, a place where they could regroup and get some rest. As they neared the cabin, the stranger turned to Ethan, his expression serious. "There's a locked room inside. It's where I keep things. I can stash you there for a while, but it's not perfect. The door's heavy, but if anyone comes, it's not much of a fortress." Ethan nodded, his gaze moving toward the cabin. "It's better than nothing." He turned to the woman, who was looking around, her eyes flickering with fear. He placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You'll be safe. I'll stay with you." The stranger stepped forward and opened the door with a slow, deliberate movement. He glanced around cautiously before stepping inside and waving them in. "Quickly, before anyone spots us." Ethan helped the woman inside, followed closely by Rex, who gave a low growl as he entered. The cabin was sparse but warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth and a single window showing the storm clouds rolling past. The stranger moved quickly to the back of the cabin, retrieving a key from beneath a floorboard. He unlocked a small room at the rear of the cabin, pushing the door open with a grunt. "Get her in there," he said, gesturing for Ethan to follow him. Ethan didn't hesitate. He helped the woman to the room, laying her down on a small cot. She winced as her body shifted, but she held on to her strength, her eyes meeting Ethan's with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak but sincere. "You don't need to thank me," Ethan replied quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're not done yet." He turned to the stranger. "Do you have any weapons?" The stranger hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I'm not a fighter. I have a rifle in the corner. It's old, but it'll do." Ethan moved to the rifle, inspecting it quickly. It was in decent condition, but it wouldn't hold up under a prolonged fight. Still, it was better than nothing. "We'll need to stay sharp," Ethan said, turning back to the woman. "You need to rest, but stay alert. He's going to come for you." The stranger spoke again, his voice low. "He's dangerous. I know what kind of man he is. He'll come with everything he has, and he won't stop until he finds you." Ethan met his gaze, his jaw tightening. "We'll be ready." The next few hours passed in uneasy silence. The storm outside began to subside, but the storm within remained. Ethan paced the small room, checking the window periodically. Rex lay near the door, his head raised, eyes scanning the shadows. The woman rested on the cot, her breathing shallow, but she was alert, her eyes tracking Ethan's movements. "I can't keep running," she whispered, her voice faint but resolute. "I've been running my whole life. I can't do it anymore." Ethan turned toward her, his heart heavy with understanding. You don't have to run anymore. We'll get you to a safe place. Just rest, okay?" She nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Ethan's promise felt like a fragile thread in the storm of their lives, but he meant it. He wouldn't stop. Not until she was safe. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by the sound of a vehicle, a truck's engine growling in the distance, cutting through the quiet night. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His worst fear had come true. Her husband had tracked them down. Ethan stood up, his eyes locking on the window. The headlights of the truck cut through the dark woods, coming closer, and then stopped just outside the clearing. The stranger was already moving toward the door, grabbing the rifle from the corner. "Stay here, I'll handle this." "No," Ethan said sharply, his eyes hardening. "You're not handling anything. I'm the one he wants, and I'm not going to let you get hurt." The stranger opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan silenced him with a look. There was no time for discussion. Rex stood up, his muscles tense. Ethan glanced at the dog, who was already at attention, ready for anything. The cabin door creaked open, and the sound of boots crunching through the mud outside sent a chill down Ethan's spine. The moment had arrived. The heavy footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate, each one echoing like a death knell in the silence of the cabin. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle, his muscles coiled, ready for whatever would come through that door. Rex stood by his side, his low growl a constant reminder of the danger that was now just outside. The woman, though weak, had pulled herself into a sitting position, her eyes wide with fear. Her husband's presence outside was undeniable, and Ethan could see the panic flickering in her gaze. "We can't stay here," she whispered urgently, the words nearly lost in the storm that raged outside. "He'll find a way in. He always does." Ethan's eyes didn't leave the door, his entire being focused on the slow, purposeful movement outside. The truck was still there, its engine idling in the distance. But the footsteps, those heavy steps, had stopped. "I know," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "But we're not going anywhere until we have to. We need to hold our ground." The woman's trembling hand found Ethan's arm, gripping him with a strength he hadn't expected. "Please, I can't lose anyone else." Her voice cracked, the weight of her plea pressing on his heart. Ethan turned to her, meeting her eyes with a fierce resolve. "You won't. I won't let him hurt you." The minutes stretched on, their tension so thick it felt like the air itself might snap. Ethan kept his attention trained on the door, his mind working through every possible scenario, every exit, every route to escape if things went south. But there was no escape, not if they didn't fight back. Then a creak, a slight shift in the cabin's structure. It was subtle, but Ethan heard it, and Rex reacted instantly, his fur bristling. The growl that rumbled from the dog's throat was primal, a warning to anyone foolish enough to enter. The door swung open just a crack, and the man's silhouette filled the space beyond. His presence was undeniable, a towering figure in the doorway, his eyes glowing with anger and malice. The storm outside had nothing on the fury in his gaze. "You really think you can hide from me?" His voice was a low snarl, dripping with venom. "You think you can escape me? I'll find you no matter where you go." Ethan didn't flinch. He took a slow step forward, keeping the rifle steady. Rex growled louder, his hackles raised, but Ethan's focus remained on the man in the doorway. "You need to leave," Ethan said, his voice sharp and commanding. "Now." The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think you can threaten me? You're nothing but a soldier, a fool, and I'll make sure you regret getting in my way." Without warning, the man stepped forward, pushing the door wider, his shoulders broad and imposing. He was armed. A handgun was visible at his side, the cold steel glinting in the dim light of the cabin. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. He raised the rifle, aiming it directly at the man. His finger hovered over the trigger, ready for whatever would come next. "I'm not afraid of you," Ethan said firmly, his voice unwavering. This ends now. The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure rage. He pulled the gun from its holster with a swift motion, aiming it directly at Ethan. Time seemed to slow. Ethan's instincts kicked in, his body moving before his mind could process the danger. With one swift motion, he dove to the side, rolling behind a table for cover. Rex lunged forward, his teeth bared, and the man's gunfire rang out, a deafening crack that splintered the cabin's wooden walls. But the shot missed. Ethan didn't wait to see if the man would take another shot. He fired first, the sound of the rifle blasting through the air, deafening in the small space. The bullet struck the man's shoulder, sending him stumbling back, a cry of pain escaping his lips. The man fell back, his gun falling to the ground, but he didn't stay down for long. With a snarl, he pushed himself to his feet, anger flashing in his eyes. "Your dog will be the first to go," he snarled, his voice thick with hatred. But Rex wasn't about to let that happen. With a furious bark, the canine charged, his teeth sinking into the man's arm, forcing him to drop the gun again. The man screamed in pain, his body jerking violently as he tried to shake Rex off. Ethan, heart pounding, took advantage of the moment. He moved quickly, closing the distance between himself and the man, his rifle aimed at the man's chest. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice low, but filled with authority. The man glared at him, but he knew the fight was over. The pain in his arm, the bite from Rex, and the rifle aimed at his chest had left him no choice. With a growl, the man dropped to his knees, his eyes burning with fury, but understanding that he had lost. "This isn't over," he spat, blood dripping from his lips. Ethan didn't respond. He moved quickly, his mind already shifting to the next step. He needed to make sure the woman was safe, and he needed to get out of here. This wasn't over, but it would be for tonight. "Help her," Ethan said to the stranger, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "Get her somewhere safe." The stranger nodded, stepping forward cautiously as Ethan kept his rifle trained on the man. "You'll live," Ethan said coldly, "but don't come back." As the stranger helped the woman to her feet, Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the man, ensuring he wouldn't make another move. The man didn't try to fight back, but his eyes burned with hatred, and Ethan knew this wasn't the last time they would cross paths. "Let's go," Ethan said, motioning for the stranger and the woman to follow him. Rex stayed close, his ears perked, ready for whatever came next. The night was far from over, but for the moment they were safe. The cabin door creaked shut behind them with a soft thud, but the noise felt deafening, as if the world itself had closed them in. The storm was quieter now, but the air remained thick with tension, as if the storm wasn't just outside, but still swirling within the walls of the small cabin. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, checking the man one last time. He was still on the ground, his breath shallow, his hand clutching at the wound in his shoulder where Rex had bitten him. The man's eyes flickered between hate and fear, but he wasn't moving, at least for now. Turning his attention back to the woman, Ethan quickly crossed the room to where she stood, still clutching her side, her face pale but determined. "We need to keep moving," he said softly. "We can't stay here long. He won't be alone for long." The stranger, now standing by the window with a rifle in hand, nodded. His face was hard, his movements sharp and controlled, but there was still a trace of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't the fighter Ethan was, but he was resourceful. And right now, that was enough. "Where do we go?" the stranger asked, his voice rough from the tension. "There's a safe house a few miles out. I know the area," Ethan replied, his gaze flickering to the woman, who seemed to be holding her composure despite the ordeal. "We'll get there, rest, and figure out our next move." The woman looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile but strong. "I don't know how much longer I could have kept running." Ethan gave her a soft nod, understanding more than she realized. He wasn't just saving her from her husband, he was giving her a chance to rebuild, to escape the life that had held her in its grasp for so long. "We'll get you through this," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But we have to stay sharp." Rex, ever vigilant, stood at the doorway, his ears perked, his body tense. Ethan knew his dog wouldn't let his guard down, not for a second. Rex had been through battles of his own, and his loyalty was unmatched. "Let's move," Ethan said, his tone firm. "We have to get out of here before he comes back with reinforcements." The woman and the stranger followed his lead, and they quickly made their way out of the cabin. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the air was still heavy, the scent of wet earth and pine lingering in the air. Ethan stayed at the front, his senses alert to every sound in the woods. The path they had to take was narrow and winding, surrounded by trees that seemed to close in on them, a constant reminder that danger was never far. As they moved, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. The storm had slowed the man's progress, but it wouldn't slow him forever. They had to put distance between themselves and the cabin, or they would be sitting ducks. After a few miles, they reached a clearing where the safe house stood, a small, run-down structure hidden among the trees. It wasn't much, but it would provide the cover they needed for now. Ethan led them inside, making sure to lock the door behind them. The inside was sparse, with only a few old pieces of furniture, a wood stove in the corner, and a small table covered in dust. It was more of a shelter than a home, but for the moment it was enough. The woman collapsed onto a chair, her body trembling with the strain of everything she had endured. Ethan's eyes softened, and he stepped toward her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We're safe for now," he said, trying to offer reassurance, but there was still a cloud of uncertainty hanging over them. The storm outside had passed, but the real danger was still out there. And it was only a matter of time before her husband came looking for her again. "I don't know how to thank you," the woman whispered, her voice raw. "You've saved my life." Ethan shook his head, his gaze distant. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone would do." But he wasn't sure if he believed that himself. No one else would have risked as much as he had for a complete stranger. No one else would have fought back against the man who had hurt her, who had driven her to the edge of desperation. But Ethan wasn't just anyone. He'd seen too much of the world's darkness to turn a blind eye to someone in need. Suddenly, a soft whine from Rex broke the silence. The dog was sitting by the door, his eyes alert as he stared at the small window. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, and his hand instinctively went to the rifle he'd left by the door. "It's him," the woman said quietly, her voice shaking again. "He's here." Ethan's heart raced. The moment they'd feared had come. There was no more time for hiding. The stranger grabbed the rifle, his grip tight. "We can't stay here. He'll break through that door in minutes." Ethan nodded, his mind already working through their options. He had to protect the woman, but he also had to protect the others. "We're not giving up now," Ethan said, his voice calm but with a weight of finality. "Get ready." He moved to the window, peering through the narrow slit in the wooden frame. The man's truck was parked outside, just within view. But this time, it wasn't just the man. There were other figures, shadows that moved with the precision of people who knew how to hunt. "Stay low," Ethan commanded, his voice steady and controlled. "He's not here alone. We'll need to move fast. They'll surround us if we stay too long." As he prepared for what would surely be their next battle, he glanced at the woman one more time. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else now, a spark of resolve. They were in this together, for better or worse. The atmosphere in the small safe house grew thick with tension, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, now a constant reminder of the ticking clock on their survival. Ethan's eyes darted around the room, calculating their options. His mind raced through scenarios, each one filled with danger. The last thing he wanted was for the woman, or the stranger, to get caught in the crossfire. Rex stood by the window, his body low, his eyes trained on the approaching danger outside. The dog was still, focused, His ears pricked at the faintest sound. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked at his loyal companion. Rex had been through so much, and now, in the final moments, he had become their first line of defense. "Stay low," Ethan murmured to the woman and the stranger, his voice sharp and commanding. "Don't move unless I say so." The woman nodded, her hands trembling, but she didn't protest. She had been through too much to argue. She understood. There was no time left for hesitation. Ethan turned to the stranger who had grabbed the rifle. His hands were unsteady, but his resolve was clear. "You know how to use that?" Ethan asked, his voice low, but carrying an edge. The stranger swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear, but he nodded. "I've used a rifle before, but never like this." Ethan gave him a quick look, as if assessing whether he could trust him. Then he nodded. "Stay with the woman. Don't let them get too close." The stranger's eyes locked with Ethan's, his jaw tightening. He was scared, but his survival instincts were kicking in. "I won't let anything happen to her." Ethan gave a curt nod and moved silently toward the back door, his every step calculated, his breath steady. He needed to assess the situation, figure out where the enemy was, and plan his next move. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Rex was right beside him, his ears perked, body low to the ground, as if the dog could smell the danger in the air. Ethan slowly eased open the back door just a crack, peering into the forest beyond. He could see shadows moving, figures slipping between trees circling the cabin. They were trying to cut off all escape routes. The man had brought reinforcements. Ethan's heart pounded as he made a quick decision. They couldn't stay here. There was no way out unless they made a run for it. The longer they waited, the more likely it was they would be trapped. He turned to the stranger. "We need to move now. There's a small creek about half a mile west of here. We can use it to cover our tracks. It's the only chance we've got." The stranger looked hesitant, his fear palpable, but Ethan's tone left no room for argument. "You want to survive? We move, now." The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide but determined. "I'll do whatever it takes." Ethan nodded, and in that moment he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. They were in this together. The man outside might think he had the upper hand, but Ethan knew better. He wasn't going to let him win. "We'll go out the back. Keep low and move fast. Stay in the shadows," Ethan instructed. "Rex, come." The dog followed without hesitation, staying close to Ethan's side as they slipped out into the damp night. The rain had picked up again, but it worked to their advantage. The sounds of the storm masked their movements, the wet ground muffling their footsteps as they made their way toward the creek. They moved through the woods, staying silent, their senses stretched to their limits. Every rustling leaf, every breaking twig made their hearts race. But they couldn't stop now. They had to keep moving. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the creek. The water was fast-moving, but it wasn't deep. Ethan knew the trail ahead would be muddy and treacherous, but the creek would offer them some cover. They'd be harder to track in the water. "Cross quickly," Ethan said, his voice low. "Keep your distance from the bank. If they get too close, we'll have to fight." The woman stepped into the water, her legs shaky but determined, while the stranger followed close behind. Rex plunged into the creek with ease, his powerful limbs pushing him through the current as Ethan led the way. As they crossed, Ethan's mind never stopped working. The man wouldn't stop looking for them. He would be relentless, driven by rage and desperation. Ethan didn't know how long they could keep this up, but they had to make it to a larger town, get help, or the woman would be in danger forever. The other side of the creek offered some safety, at least for the moment. The woods were denser here, and Ethan signaled for everyone to take cover. They crouched low in the underbrush, waiting for any signs of pursuit. Minutes passed, then hours. The storm began to let up, leaving only a soft drizzle, but there was no sign of the man or his reinforcements. Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but they weren't out of the woods yet. "We'll rest for a bit," Ethan said, his voice strained. "But we can't stay long. We need to keep moving." The woman nodded, but her eyes were filled with fatigue. She had been through so much already, and the weight of everything was starting to show. She was strong, but even strength had its limits. "Do you think they'll find us?" the stranger asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ethan didn't hesitate. "They'll try, but we'll make sure they don't." He wasn't sure if he believed that himself, but it didn't matter. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it.